Thank you. Good morning. Thank you for coming on this very rainy Sunday that's not promising to clear up. We ring that gong for three reasons: to acknowledge those who came before, and those who are here now, and those who will come in the future. So, I'm your service leader today. My name is Lillian Fifield. And I want you to know that this is a place where you can come and be yourself, but not by yourself. And it's a place where we welcome whomever you are and whoever you love, however you describe yourself or name the holy. Just know you are welcome here. We also don't see any. Yes, maybe so. Welcome anyone here for the first time, and we hope you'll come back. And certainly those who have been here more recently and are joining us again. We, too, acknowledge the people who came before us on this land called Umpqua. Their name graces our congregation, our river, our valley, the river that flows through the land. And they were here for thousands of years, living in harmony with the land and each other. And they're still here giving us gifts of action and wisdom. So we make this land acknowledgement in recognition of the Umpqua and in the beginning of an atonement for harms done, part of the path towards healing. Know that here masks are not mandatory. They are worn for protection of others, and we do ask if you have a cold on that day you wear a mask. There are some announcements in your order of service. And much appreciation goes to our staff of greeters, Ellen Mary Harrington, our tech, who you'll get to see a lot of what he does today, Jake Tranter, and of course our music director, Sean Shea. We have a little bit of a different order planned for you today, so at this point, I get to introduce to you, even though he's not going to be coming right up here, our minister for the day, and that is Reverend Stephen Landale. He's been a hospice chaplain for over 10 years. He's an ordained UU minister. He's also a member of the First Christian Church in Eugene. He's married to Heather, who often comes to visit, and is the dad of a daughter who's in middle school, and we get to see her today too. He has a son in college. The topic for today is History Has Its Eyes on You, from Hamilton, of course. So that will be in just a few minutes, but before we do that, this is a time in our service when we take our fish collection. Fish is a food pantry here in town, and we have been a part of other churches in the larger Roseburg community that through compassion show up with either food or money and make contributions to those among us who may be ill, hungry, or without shelter. So our support of the fish pantry is most appreciated, and the baskets are coming around, and know we will make good use of what's in there. Thank you, Anand and JC. The offertory will come a little bit later. I want to welcome our audience that's watching on live streaming, probably more today than usual because of that rain. We begin our service each time by lighting our chalice, and the words for our chalice today are by William Schultz, entitled, "Come into this place of peace." Come into this place of peace and let its silence heal your spirit. Come into this place of memory and let its history warm your soul. And come into this place of prophecy and power and let its vision change your heart. Arthritis makes some of those things difficult. We have some opening words today, and they are, may we be reminded here of our highest aspirations and inspired to bring our gifts of love and service to the altar of humanity. And may we know once again that we are not isolated beings, but connected in mystery and miracle to the universe, to this community, and to each other. Please join now for hymn number 126. It will be on video and is in your black order of service.
Come, thou fount of every blessing, tune our hearts to sing thy grace. Streams of mercy never ceasing, call for songs of loudest praise. While the hope of life's perfection fills our hearts with joy and love, teach us ever to be faithful. May we still thy goodness prove. Come, thou fount of every vision, lift our hearts to what may come. See the lion and the lambkin dwell together in thy home. Hear our cries of war fall silent, feel our love flow like the sun. When we all serve one another, then our heaven is begun. Come, thou fount of inspiration, turn our lives to higher ways. Lift our gloom and desperation, show the promise of this day. Help us find ourselves in union, help our hands tell of our love. With thy hate, O fount of justice, earthly fed as heaven above.
Seeing, oh, we do have a child. Hi. I couldn't see you. So let us sing our wonderful child downstairs with Anand, and we will be singing Go Now in Peace. words are in your order of service. Somebody besides me has to start that. At this time in our service, we take some time to invite you to come up and light a candle for any joy or concern or whatever is important at the moment that you need to share or want to share with the congregation. So if you have something that you would like to share, I'll be here with candles and the microphone if you choose a spoken word, and if not, just light a candle from the candle there and stick it in the sand. It is at this time in our service where we are supported, of course, by the voluntary contributions and the generosity of all who join with us. So your support fuels this community and its mission, and without your support, the flame of justice, community, and love cannot burn so brightly. Know for the gifts we have received that we are truly grateful, and may we be committed to using these gifts to make a difference in the world and to expand our beloved community. At this point, we're going to make a little change, just a slight one, in how the service flows. Let me tell you how that's going to work for today. This is a time when we do a meditation, which we will do. After the meditation, though, sometimes, I come back up here and blah, blah, blah. But today, you're going to be brought out of your meditation by the music of Hamilton. And there will be two pieces that follow the meditation. The first is History Has Its Eyes on You, which is the original cast from 2016. And then the second piece actually was recorded live, so there's a little bit of applause, but it's called One Last Time with Lin-Manuel Miranda and Christopher Jackson. So there'll be those two pieces. And then, since I already told you a little bit about Reverend Stephen Landell, and most of you know him well, he will be presenting a sermon on Hamilton and much more. And that will be followed by a third piece of music relating again to the sermon. And a few more words, and then I will be back up here. I want to let you know there will be no sermon discussion immediately following the sermon, but Reverend Landell would love to meet with you back in the corner or up here after the service is completely over. So let us begin now with a short meditation. I invite you to kind of make yourself comfortable in your chair. And begin to take some slow breaths, deep breaths in, and then release. So breathe in, and then breathe out. In, breath, out, breath. In, and out. As you're relaxing, think upon these words by Elizabeth Hamilton, or Eliza Hamilton. Look at where you are. Look at where you started. The fact that you're alive is a miracle. Just stay alive. That would be enough.
tell you what I wish I'd known when I was young and dreamed of glory. You have no control. Who lives, who dies, who tells your story? I know that we can win. I know that greatness lies in you. But remember, from here on in, history has its eyes on you. History has its eyes on you.
Joined by the New Works Voices of America Youth Choir, please welcome Christopher Jackson, Alex Lacamoire, and Lin-Manuel Miranda.
Mr. President, you asked to see me.
I know you're busy.
What do you need, sir? Sir.
I want to give you a word of warning.
Sir, I don't know what you heard, but whatever it is, Jefferson started it.
Thomas Jefferson resigned this morning.
You're kidding.
I need a favor.
Whatever you say, sir, Jefferson will pay for his behavior.
Shh. Talk less.
I'll use the press. I'll write under a pseudonym. You'll see what I can do to him.
I need you to draft an address.
Yes, he resigned. You can finally speak your mind.
No. He's stepping down so he can run for president.
Good luck defeating you, sir.
I'm stepping down. I'm not running for president.
Sorry, what?
One last time. Relax, have a drink with me one last time. Let's take a break tonight and then we'll teach them how to say goodbye. To say goodbye, you and I.
No, sir,
I
why?
want to talk about neutrality.
Sir, with Britain and France on the verge of war, is this the best
I
time
want to warn against partisan fighting.
But-
Pick up a pen, start writing. I want to talk about what I have learned, the hard-won wisdom I have earned.
As far as the people are concerned, you have to serve. You could continue to serve.
No, one last time. The people will hear from me one last time. And if we get this right, we're gonna teach them how to say goodbye. You and I.
Mr. President, they will say you're weak.
No, they will see we're strong.
Your position is so unique.
So I'll use it to move them along.
Why do you have to say goodbye?
If I say goodbye, the nation learns to move on. It outlives me when I'm gone. Like the scripture says, everyone shall sit under their own vine and fig tree. No one shall make them afraid. They'll be safe in the nation we've made. I want to sit under my own vine and fig tree, a moment alone in the shade, at home in this nation we've made. One last time.
One last time. Though in reviewing the incidents of my administration, I am unconscious of intentional error, I'm nevertheless too sensible of my defects not to think it probable that I may have committed many errors. I shall also carry with me the hope that my country will view them with indulgence, and that after 45 years of my life dedicated to its service with an upright zeal, faults of incompetent abilities will be consigned to oblivion, as I myself must soon be to the mansions of rest.
I anticipate with pleasing expectation that retreat, in which I promise myself to realize the sweet enjoyment of partaking in the midst of my fellow citizens. The benign influence of good laws under a free government, the ever-favorite object of my heart, and the happy reward, as I trust, of our mutual cares, labors, and dangers. One last time, teach them how to say goodbye. George Washington's going home.
I have never stepped up to a pulpit with applause like that. Thank you. I love, by the way, a couple things I noticed watching that video again, is how Lin-Manuel Miranda, who's playing Hamilton, also wrote the musical, as most of you probably know. He's in and out of being Hamilton and just being himself, like, oh my gosh, my musical is in front of everybody and smiling. I love it. Well, if you haven't seen Hamilton on stage or on the Disney Channel, you've probably heard some of it, and if you hadn't, well, now you have. Who would have thought that a hip-hop musical about the United States of America's first Treasury Secretary would become so popular? Well, I don't even think Miranda anticipated this level of popularity. But when Miranda read this book, the hardback version of which I think could be classified as a weapon, I think he must have seen something of himself in Hamilton. From the West Indies, Miranda's from Puerto Rico, quick, intelligent, energetic, charismatic, incredibly prolific and talented, outspoken, talks and writes nonstop, as the cast sings of Hamilton in one of the songs. Now, the songs you just heard were parts of were not hip-hop, but rap-based hip-hop is about half the music in Hamilton. And I can't imagine, now that I've heard it, any form of music better suited to explaining the 10 dual commandments or cabinet battles between leaders of the same administration who attacked one another in ways that would make Trump's cabinet blush. And Hercules Mulligan sounds as much like a rapper's name as that of a Revolutionary War hero. There are so many layers to what I want to share with you today that it's hard to know where to start. There are universal themes beautifully portrayed, especially at the end. Infidelity, betrayal, honor, pride, grief, humility, forgiveness, grace, and love. I'll return to some of these at the end of my sermon. And the musical does a beautiful job of inviting us to consider history itself and what it means to be part of history, for history has its eyes on us. We are in the midst of history. So I'll begin with the history that is revealed anew in this fabulous musical, from the very low history to the highest. A low point of American history, touched on in the musical and described in detail in Chernow's biography, was the ugly infighting between the Hamilton and Jefferson factions, which birthed, to Washington's dismay, our first two political parties, the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans. When Chernow wrote the biography in 2004, he described not only how vicious the leaders and journalists of these parties could be to one another, but how the parties effectively functioned as cults of personality. And Chernow clearly thought this was something new, that, this is not what parties became. Parties became more aligned around policy. At the time, policies were important, but it was really about cult of personality. So he described this as a phenomenon, as a thing of the past. But now we seem to have things have become just as polarized as then. And one of our two major parties has become a cult of personality in ways that nobody foresaw when Chernow wrote this book. So I found this part of our history both disturbing but also reassuring. If things were just as polarized and nasty in the first decade of our Constitution's history as they are now, and arguably more so, and somehow we got through that period, and even stronger, well, maybe we'll get through our current rough patch as well. The most moving historical high point of the musical for me was Washington's decision to step down after 2 terms. As you may know, the end of that song quotes directly from the final paragraphs of Washington's farewell speech, which I noticed were displayed in the background, in the screen of the background. That might have been Hamilton's writing, by the way. A speech that has been read aloud on the U.S. Senate floor annually by our senators, alternating between Republican and Democratic senators each year since 1899. Entire speech. The House of Representatives did the same thing until 1984, reading the speech that Madison helped write an early draft of the speech, but most of it was Hamilton and Washington. Teach Them How to Say Goodbye was an incredibly timely message when the musical came out in 2015 that unfortunately fell on deaf ears with the next president. I doubt there's been a time in American history when there's been in greater need of Washington's humility, honor, and decency, and the sense of solidarity. His speech really did end with these words. I'm going to quote them. I anticipate with pleasing expectation that retreat in which I promise myself to realize without alloy the sweet enjoyment of partaking in the midst of my fellow citizens, the benign influence of good laws under a free government, the ever-favorite object of my heart, and the happy reward, as I trust, of our mutual cares, labors, and dangers. It's beautiful. The screen showed neutral cares. The word is mutual cares, labors, and dangers. I remember when I heard that musical, I thought, did Washington really end the speech with the word dangers? But the key word in that last sentence is not dangers, it's mutual. Mutual cares, labors, and dangers. Washington's final words. What a beautiful message of solidarity, of love. What a voice and vision to lift up in our age. Now, while much of the history had to be adapted to become a musical, and facts changed when Hamilton was confronted about what seemed like financial impropriety. 3 men did confront him, but it wasn't the 3 that were portrayed. It was others, but that would just be too darn many characters. Manuel's Hamilton is still fairly true to the biography that inspired it, Alexander Hamilton by Ron Chernow. Most obviously, the musical lifts up Alexander Hamilton himself, the immigrant from a tiny West Indies island whose father abandoned the family and then whose mother died when he was 12, and they were quarantined together in a bedroom with a tropical illness, sleeping in the same bed. 12-year-old lost his mother that way. He was taken in by a cousin who soon committed suicide and then left him out of his will. Any resources that Alexander and his brother might have inherited were either willed to others or claimed by others, mainly his mother's first husband, in court. It's one tragedy after another, with even more in the book. And yet, in just a few years, Hamilton is fast becoming a scholar and effectively General George Washington's chief of staff, his right-hand man. When I read the book, I thought it might be exaggeration. Actually, his role was even greater for Washington than was shown in the musical. After the war, Hamilton plays a key role in setting the stage for what would later be called the Constitutional Convention. He was one of the people, with Washington, he saw these Articles of Confederation aren't working. We can't rely on the states to voluntarily pitch in. I mean, they were eating the horses, their horses literally, the soldiers were, and worse. And so he called for a constitutional convention. And while his more extreme views were not included in the Constitution, thank God, he becomes one of its leading defenders nonetheless. Constitutional law today is based not only on the Constitution itself, but on the Federalist Papers, originally called the Federalist. Most were written by Hamilton, and he organized the whole endeavor. And on the precedent set by what should be called the Washington-Hamilton administration. Again, Hamilton was not just Secretary of Treasury, he was effectively Chief of Staff. And with a wide range of powers given to the federal government, to the executive branch in particular, there's so much room to interpret the Constitution. And Hamilton kept pushing for more with the federal government and within the federal government with the executive branch. And that's why he had a breach with Madison. And much of what came to define other aspects of law, especially libel law, and certainly political economy, was built on Hamilton's shoulders as well. Chernow makes a great case that if Washington was the most important founder of our country, and Madison the founder of our Constitution, then the pragmatic Hamilton was the founder of our government. And yet he's a deeply flawed man. He was power hungry. He could be manipulative when he thought the wrong person would gain too much power if he did not stop them, John Adams in particular. But most often when he erred, it was not being in conniving, but the opposite, and speaking his thoughts too plainly, aggressively, repeatedly, in too many words. He's consistently blunt and outspoken, and then he's continually shocked to find that he makes enemies of the people whose motives he publicly attacks. And then also, he can be thin-skinned when those people attack back. Having grown up with so little honor amongst all these hoity-toity types, he can't let any attack on his honor go unanswered. This is his fatal flaw, quite literally, combined with the fact that he can't just shut up. He loves his wife dearly, and yet he cheats on her, and at other times he's manipulated by women posing as damsels in distress, including in the book, one of my favorite stories, Benedict Arnold's wife, one of the most dramatic and amusing stories. And she gets Hamilton hook, line, and sinker, and Lafayette, and Washington. Anyway, we can talk about it afterwards if you want to come up here. Yet Hamilton was also incredibly generous with his time, and like Benjamin Franklin, he went around founding institutions, including the Coast Guard, and he supported many groundbreaking schools and colleges, including, get this, the Hamilton Oneida Academy, which admitted both white and native boys in the 18th century. Think about that. It was later named Hamilton College. He frequently spoke out against slavery, although not as forceful as he would have, because he had to put the Union above everything else. But he did so because he had grown up with particularly brutal forms of slavery, much worse than the American South, next in the sugar plantations in the West Indies. At a time also in which patriots, following the war, patriots were enacting revenge on loyalists, colonists who remained loyal to the crown, Hamilton stepped in to defend their rights as an attorney, and he was known for charging low rates as well as pro bono defenses. He was principled, brave, and willing to take unpopular stands for justice and human rights, although his fear of mob rule led him to be on the wrong side of some issues late in his career, including, ironically, immigration. Hamilton was remembered by his children as being very much present and loving with them, especially after he resigned as Secretary of the Treasury. And one of his greatest roles was as chief scribe and ghostwriter for George Washington during the war and in his presidency. He was the quintessential behind-the-scenes role. He didn't get credit for any of this. Eliza was the one who came forward after his death and showed up drafts of the address and said, "My husband wrote this, most of it." His enemies portrayed him as corrupt and self-serving, but he did not abuse his office as they had thought, And he had an amazing, empathetic ability to step into the shoes, mind, and heart of Washington and help him express himself as Washington in ways both humble and lofty, deeply moving, as in Washington's farewell speech. The young man who came to the colonies hoping a war would break out somehow so he could rise up and make his mark grew into the man who could slowly step back and help another leader shine. Even after dozens of viewings, I still get chills whenever I see or hear that song, with Hamilton, the speechwriter, giving way to Washington, who gets to sing the only gospel song in the musical and the most rousing conclusion of any song. So the musical has lifted up Hamilton, long scorned as a greedy creator of Wall Street, who once proposed that the United States have a hereditary monarch, but he got past that idea. And it has done so in an era when previously deified founders like Jefferson are being demoted for their inability to give up slaves. Jefferson was full of fine words of equality, poetic words, and even wrote against slavery in his early draft of the Declaration of Independence, only to have others insist those words be removed. But he kept his own slaves, because giving up his slaves would have meant giving up his freedom to tinker all he wanted in Monticello and buy all the art and books he wanted in France. He brought back like 40 crates of them and furniture. Had Jefferson freed his slaves, the self-anointed hero of the working man farmer might have had to roll up his sleeves and do the farming himself. But no, Jefferson kept the slaves, most of whom were sold to God knows where after he died, except for those who were probably literally, biologically, his own family. By the way, if you ever get to visit the National Mall in Washington, D.C., you might want to notice how the sole African American lifted up in the American pantheon, Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., is positioned. He is standing, arms folded, with a stern expression, facing almost directly across the water at what? The Jefferson Memorial. When I brought my children there some years ago, it struck me that King might be saying, President Jefferson, we are greatly indebted to the fine words of freedom and basic human rights you wrote into our Declaration of Independence. But if you don't mind, sir, I'm just going to keep an eye on you whenever I see any black folk around. What we can say of Hamilton, we can say of Jefferson, and the history of our country as a whole. Great ideals, great flaws and hypocrisies, great courage, and blind spots aplenty, much to admire and build on, much to regret and correct. Should Jefferson be worshipped? I mean, thousands of years ago, would people look at the Jefferson Memorial the way we see the Greek pantheon? No. But can one feel a sense of awe and be changed for the better by standing in his memorial and reading the moving words of freedom that he wrote? Yes. Can we thank him for courageously giving voice to ideals of equality, dignity, and freedom that would set this country on a course to outgrow his own limitations? Yes. The same may be said of Hamilton and others, and we may recognize that none of them would have made a difference were it not for the courage and ingenuity and sacrifice of tens of thousands of more ordinary people, women as well as men, old and young, slave and free. Cultural and political history, like personal memory, are not static things. Our personal memories are a dance between what actually happened years ago, how we came to frame those experiences soon after, and our beliefs, our predicaments, our yearnings, and our character. The strengths and limitations of our abilities to forgive, to imagine, to hope, and to love. Hamilton the musical has itself become a part of history. Not just telling history, it's become part of history, with its cast consisting mainly of people of color, and its influence credibly keeping Hamilton on the $10 bill. As you may know, President Obama was about to remove him in favor of Harriet Tubman. Hamilton was performed in the White House. Sometime after that, Obama changed his mind. Instead, President Jackson, Andrew Jackson, was removed from the $20 bill to make way for Harriet Tubman. A much better choice, I think. But I don't think Hamilton the musical was created, nor his image kept on the $10 bill, because of Lin-Manuel Miranda's love for the economic system Hamilton devised and administered, or for his success even in promoting a vigorous central government. Hamilton was lifted up because he was an immigrant Miranda and so many others could relate to, and a human being who rose up from incredibly tragic circumstances to the very top of political power and influence in our country, where he undeniably helped us get off to a strong start. He was deeply flawed, and yet there was something very good in him that burned so brightly, something even his wife could trust, love, and trust after his infidelity. And even his personal dignity was something that Jefferson could acknowledge years later. We can appreciate Hamilton's story and contributions now because of Miranda, because of Ron Chernow, because of Eliza Hamilton, who for 50 years after his death labored to restore his legacy, and because of so many others who have told his story. So history is not static. It is alive. We are all historians to varying degrees of our families, our communities, and of our country and humanity, and of Gaia, the living earth that is our home. Whose story we tell and how we tell it matters. If we tell of Jefferson without acknowledging his unwillingness to give up his own slaves, we are not telling the whole truth, and we are trivializing slavery. Yet neither are we speaking the whole truth if we speak of him only, or I would argue primarily, with disdain because of this, as if we knew for certain that we would have acted better in his position. Instead of looking down scornfully on previously deified founding fathers and other men because of their very real flaws, we might ask ourselves, what will history say of us? What are our blind spots? How many of us, self included, are deeply concerned about the climate crisis, yet continue to make choices that we know are making it worse? Taking unnecessary flights, owning a car when we perhaps don't need one, eating meat. And how many of us who eat meat have taken the time to visit a slaughterhouse or factory farm? How many of us would give up our cell phones until the materials required to make them were mined solely in humane ways, with no modern-day slavery or something close to it, as it is, for instance, with cobalt mining in the Congo now, today? So we're buying things produced with something slavery or something very close to it. Most of us, myself included, choose not to think about these things. Well, Jefferson pretended that slavery wasn't so bad because he treated his slaves well, so far as that goes. He didn't want to think about the unimaginable slave ships, the beatings, the rapes, the murders, and everyday cruelties like forced family separations, which happened undoubtedly with some of his own slaves after he passed. And Northerners, even those who said they opposed slavery, didn't want to think about how many of the goods they produced were available because of slave labor or available at an affordable cost because of it. So let's be compassionate with all those bigoted white men from decades or centuries past, acknowledge their hypocrisies and blind spots, unconscious or conscious, usually a mixture of the two, as traits that we all share to varying degrees. Let's focus on the logs in our own eyes rather than the specks in theirs. We are more addicted to convenience and luxury than they were, and we have much greater access to information regarding supply chains and regarding the cumulative long-term effects of our actions, especially our purchases. We have fewer excuses than they did. So what kinds of historians are we? Not just of the long past, but of the thing that happened right around us yesterday. For the ways we frame those stories become the inherited histories of others. Are we gossips? Do we strive to see and speak with empathy? Do we put down others that we know personally or people from the past, mainly because we want to get in better with our social group and look good? Are we able, like Eliza Hamilton, to forgive others, especially in our family, focusing on their gifts and positive legacy? And yes, doing so leaves room for constructive truth-telling about the mistakes, betrayals, and abuses of others, but we can still forgive. When we learn about the hypocrisies and prejudices of others, are we drawn to understand them as fellow human beings, or do we look down on them as if we were something better? It's true that we have no control over who lives, who dies, who tells our story, but we can know that some things are more enduring than others. Hamilton's life story inspires in this age because for all of his flaws, he was a fighter for the union of our country and the primary architect of our stability and prosperity. He strove to give the Union a strong start. He believed that a strong government with the rule of law could protect liberty and catalyze economic vitality, the sort of society in which people from humble origins, like himself, could rise up, become independent, contribute, and even lead, regardless of their background. I'd like to close with an important detail I found towards the end of the biography. Hamilton was motivated to go through with the duel with Vice President Aaron Burr, in large part because he feared that if he backed down, Burr would gain political stock, win the race of governor for New York, which was a bigger position than being vice president, really, and from there tip the scales in favor of the New England Federalists who wanted to break away from the Union. It seems there actually was a chance of civil war during the Jefferson administration, started by the North, and Hamilton knew that Burr would support it and seek to lead it if they thought they would come out on top. Hamilton didn't want to, the party that he created, the Federalists, wanted to go to disunion rather than lose their power. In fact, the next 4 or 5 presidents were all Democratic Republicans. But Hamilton said, no, it's better to lose power and keep our union. And he was willing to risk his life to defend it. Hamilton wrote about this situation with personal language that was almost unheard of for the time. I couldn't find the exact words here. It came to me last night. But he said something very close to this. And if they broke the Union, or if the Federalists broke the Union, it would break my heart. He almost never wrote in such personal terms. Thousands and thousands of pages. Hamilton, who grew up with so much chaos, loved this new nation like his own baby. This particular aspect of the duel was, for simplicity's sake, I'm sure, left out of the musical. But Lin-Manuel Miranda nonetheless shined a light on the love Hamilton had for the Union, a love he shared with Washington. And despite his earlier affair when working nonstop hours in the early months of the Washington administration, Alexander and Eliza's love for one another was undeniable and enduring. She kept on loving him for 50 years after he passed. While so many aspects of Miranda's Hamilton musical are ingenious and unforgettable, his cabinet debate rap battles between Jefferson and Hamilton never ceased to entertain and educate my family. To save my daughter from embarrassment, I won't go into it right now. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Okay, I'll stop. What Miranda really achieves is lifting up the humanity and love of Alexander Hamilton, George Washington, and Eliza Hamilton. Our last hymn is based on the Christian scripture 1 Corinthians chapter 13, in which Paul is addressing the congregation at Corinth, that's why it's called Corinthians, specifically the leaders who are vying for influence and perhaps bragging rights. Who is the most important? That's the context. Is it the one who preaches or teaches or prophesies or speaks in tongues? Paul reminds them that without love, none of these gifts are of value. You can have faith to remove mountains, but without love, you are nothing. Historians who argue over which founder was the greatest remind me of the leaders at Corinth. Ultimately, it's the love behind the leaders' actions that will make the deepest imprint. Washington's farewell address would not be revered these many years later if it were merely insightful or prophetic and not infused with gospel-worthy love, especially at its conclusion. It's like that in our personal lives too. Children may be guided by the advice of their parents and other guides, but only to the extent that such advice was offered in the spirit of love, of solidarity. From the perspective of over 10 years of full-time hospice work, I can say confidently that love is what carries the day with those who survive us. Failures and hurts are most often forgiven when there has been steady, if imperfect, love, especially in our last chapter, when our positive legacies can be doubled and our negative legacies be halved by ending well. And without sufficient love, there is a great emptiness, a complex grief. The more we live with love, with genuine concern for others, the greater will be our legacy with others, whether or not they look back and speak our name or view our image, whether or not they erect a monument in our memory or sing a song or a musical about us. Love never dies. I invite you to join in singing our closing hymn, which is based on 1 Corinthians 13, Though I May Speak with Bravest Fire. It's number 34 in your hymnal.
Though I may speak with bravest fire and have the gift to all inspire, and have not love, my words are vain as sounding brass and hopeless gain. Though I may give all I possess, and striving so my love profess, but not begin my love within, the prophet soon turns strangely thin. Come, Spirit, come, our hearts control, our spirits long to be made whole. Let inward love guide every deed. By this we worship and are freed.
Thank you, Stephen. My goodness. It is at this point that we have some closing words, and do remember that Reverend Landau will be with us up here after the service if you want to talk about anything that he had to say. Our closing words today are by Barbara Peskin, and they go, because of those who came before, we are. In spite of their failings, we believe. And because of and in spite of the horizons of their vision, we too dream. And in extinguishing our chalice, Mary Oliver says, to live in this world, we must be able to do three things: to love what is mortal, to hold it against your bones, knowing your own life depends on it. And when time comes to let it go, let it go, let go. Please join us and go lift it up. Please join us for coffee and conversation afterwards, and blessed be.